further down that road because there's a village down there. The village headman has sworn to kill you on sight. And Gandhi said, oh, really? What's his name? Let's go there. And they said, no, you don't understand. Gandhi said, oh, yeah, I understand. So he went up to the door of this man's hut and knocked on it. The guy opened the door. He was quite startled. And Gandhi said, I'm here to help you fulfill your vow. So this person, taken somewhat by surprise, he reached out and started choking Gandhi. And Gandhi must have been repeating his mantra like gangbusters and did not try to physically defend himself. And after what must have seemed like a fairly long period of time to Gandhi, the fellow dropped his hands and then fell at his feet. And he said, this whole village is at your disposal. So, I'm sorry, why am I talking about this? It was, yes, thank you. It's very important. I need several of you in the front row to do that. So Gandhi gets to Britain, and he has brought about a cloth boycott, which has put like 100,000 textile workers in Lancashire out of work, and he says, I want to go there. And he went there. It took him like 2 hours to completely convince those people that you're as much victimized by this system as I am. He said, don't even dream of bringing back the old cloth trade. It victimizes you and victimizes us. And he said to them, I want you to stop and think who is exploiting you. And this is one of the reasons why I was so keen on having our protest when the time comes be against the people against whom we really have something. Yeah. So, to be able to go to the police and say, look, you're a victim of the system. And you might remember when we discussed civilian-based defense, I said that the way that works is when soldiers have come in, you say to them, look, you and I are on the same side. You should not be fighting against us. Okay? While we're on this topic of the function of the police, remember Mayor Illich, I think that's his name, from the city of Čačak, and his dramatic convoy down to Veligrady, to Belgrade, was actually being watched by the entire nonviolence community, which is very easy to do because we all fit in one room with a 6-inch television screen. We can see it very easily. But it bears some resemblance and perhaps some comparison to a famous event that took place in India. People want to chime in here? Or anyone who's sneakily done some reading about the freedom struggle in India, climax of it? No? The Salt March, yeah. Because Gandhi could have gotten on a special train and been down to Dandin overnight, but instead he decided to walk. So he sets out with 70 people from his ashram, and by the time he gets down to the seashore, 12 days later, he has probably something like 70,000. So this is not dissimilar. It's a good example of, I've been dissing symbol users all along, so let me say, I think this is an excellent example of the way to use symbols. That is not to go for the symbol, but to go for the concrete reality. I have to get to Belgrade. That's where the government is. I got to turn these people out of that building. Or there's no salt here in the desert, in the Deccan Plateau. I've got to get down to the seashore to collect it. So you have a concrete act, which takes on symbolic proportions. And that's gold. That's pure gold. So this convoy was very closely watched by us and as scrupulously ignored by the world's media. That's their job, to ignore nonviolence until the world crumbles into dust, I suppose. Pardon my bitterness. I get this close to Northgate Hall, it starts creeping up on me. But while we've got him up here, let me bring to your mind his famous little talk on the steps of the Parliament building, where he said, don't throw stones at the police, don't throw anything at the police, ... What else did he say? Anybody remember that? Of course, it's unfair. I've seen the thing about 10 times. Yes? They're coming over to our side. Right. Okay. So don't throw stones because, followed by a strategic reason. And I thought this is neat. You might have heard me murmuring to myself over here. This is neat, I murmured. Because we can position this. Let's talk about it. How do you feel about this comment? Don't throw anything at the police. They're coming over to our side. Anybody see what's missing in this equation? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you go ahead, Amy. John gets plenty of chances. Yeah, kind of like. Yeah. If they don't, hit them with everything you've got. Right. So let's say that this is the strategic nonviolence position. What would the PNV position be? John. Period. End of quote. Right. No stones. Period. Or you might go on to say, don't throw stones at the police because there's that of God in every man, or something like that from 164A. That would depend whom you are speaking to. And then, of course, I don't know why I'm putting this up on top, but there's the violence position, which is, pelt away. And we've talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the fact that the Shabab, the testosterone-filled youth, throw stones at IDF soldiers, and how ambiguous that is, because they'd like you to think about it as an act of defiance, and it partly has that character, but it also is injurious force. So it has a violence character, and there you go. You don't know what to say. Okay, great. So that was a good start. What else? Yes, Catherine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. I'm glad that the concept of nonviolent coercion seemed weird to you. This is one of several schemas that we have in the Zuniskertz and Asher book. One is a 5-part schema that we talked about in connection with the Philippines, and this is another one which talks about, I'm sorry, I forget what the other elements are, but the final one is nonviolent coercion, and that means you have brought so much pressure on the opponent that he or she has really no practical choice but to go along with you, regardless of whether he or she believes what you're doing. And we have said that this is not principled nonviolence. Principled nonviolence works always by persuasion, not coercion. That's one of our main criteria here. And it's one of the things where coercion, I'm sorry, this is getting a little sloppy, but you could actually bracket force and coercion together as part of violence and persuasion as part of nonviolence. You would be justified in doing that. So nonviolent coercion really does look like a contradiction in terms. It's sort of like military intelligence or business ethics or something like that. So that was another clue, if any were needed, that the Utpur rebellion, for all of its brilliance and success and beauty and other good things that we're going to be discussing, it was strategic nonviolence. Now, again, my own position here, I have absolutely nothing against strategic nonviolence. Given the choice between violence and strategic nonviolence, I'll go SNV every day of the week. But the one objection that I do have is to think that strategic nonviolence is nonviolence, because then when it doesn't work, you're finished. You go back to violence. And that's kind of a travesty of nonviolence to say that you learn a few strategies out of a book written by a guy at Harvard, and you carry them out in your work, and it works. That's nonviolence. Okay. Other things, yes. Thank you. That's sorry. They use bulldozers. Now that is really interesting. What are we going to say about bulldozers? In principle, bulldozers are not instruments of persuasion, right? They are instruments of coercion. So it would, in theory, tend to line up with violence. It's definitely not persuasive. But remember, the leader of the student outport group in Belgrade, I forget his name, he's the cute guy who got elected to the parliament. Remember him saying, "This is the year. This is the year that Serbia has to be once again in favor of life." So which we're going to be talking about. But what I'm talking about right now is the timing issue. Okay. So now, if you hear this is the year and you've taken Pax 164A, immediately you think, "Oh my gosh, Swaraj in 1 year." This is what Gandhi said. He comes back to India and he has a few successful things, 5 of them actually, and he says, "Okay, we're going to have Swaraj in 1 year." This is 1919, and of course it didn't happen until 1947. Why? Okay. Who wants to say more about that? Why is that sort of okay? John or anybody? Yeah, Alex. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I like that a lot, even though I didn't come up with that idea. I think it's very good. Yeah, you're enjoying Swaraj the minute you say you can't coerce anyone. What are you going to do? Put me in jail? Go ahead. I don't care. I'm gonna do this. So you have experiencing Swaraj, and that also touches on another element that we have to discuss, and that is the visioning element. Having a vivid imagination of what you're going for, how to use that, how not to use it. I hope we're going to get to discuss that. But also, what Gandhi said was actually slightly different than "we will have Swaraj freedom in 1 year." He said, "If you give me your complete cooperation, we will have Swaraj in 1 year." And they didn't. He said, "I guess you didn't give me your complete cooperation," which was perfectly true. But now remember, we discussed the ouster of Augusto Pinochet in Chile. And we said that he was not persuaded to leave office because he had been filled with love for the Chilean people. He was booted out, and I was not willing to say that this was the wrong thing to do, because there are times when you have to do the best that you can, because the consequences of not doing so will be worse. For example, in the previous semester we talked about the Central High in Alabama being integrated by somewhat forcible, not somewhat forcible means 101st Airborne comes trooping into class with all their boots and their grenades and rifles and radios and stuff. They forced that school to be integrated. And we discussed that at some length, and we said that this was not the ideal way to do it, but the ideal way to do it would have taken so long that maybe this opportunity would have slipped away. So, okay, here they are. You did very well to raise that point, but here they are. They're on their way into Belgrade. There is a limit to the amount of time and attention the average person who has to work for a living can put into an uprising. We have to realize that if you are, that's one of the reasons that we don't succeed, that we succeed so little. We're not professional resistors. If we go out every single day, who's going to take care of the cat? Things like that. So for these pragmatic reasons, and because you have people's passions focused on this now, and because you know perfectly well that if President Milosevic stays around, he's going to use his power and influence and military might to consolidate his hold, they really did have to act if they wanted to get him out of office. And they really have to be prepared to bulldoze trucks out of the way. So I don't know exactly where we're coming out with this. I guess what I would say is if they'd come and asked me, I was sitting drumming the table, like, God, I hope they come and ask me. They didn't, of course. But if they were coming and asked me, I would not have argued against that in the moment. But I would have said, here's why this is not the ideal way to do it. I hope you don't have to use them. And let's prepare better the next time so we can walk into Belgrade and nobody can stop us, so we don't have to use coercion at all. But let's face it, that would have taken years and years. Look, you had the cute guy, I keep forgetting his name. He said, we had no idea somebody had written a book about this. They were starting from zero. Okay, this is excellent. Other observations? Yeah, Sam. Yeah. And realistically, I think, given the way most industrial societies are set up, that this is how a lot of these uprisings have to happen for various reasons. And students have the idealism. I mean, why do you think I come here? I could be out writing a great American novel or being a failed bluegrass musician. There's any number of careers I could have failed at. But I don't think we need to elaborate on it, but students have a unique position and a unique energy, and everything of value has started with them. But then it also has to move beyond them. And we will see some exceptions to this when we talk about the uprisings that are going on in non-industrial sectors or non-industrial countries. And namely, when we talk about things going on in the Philippines and India and Africa, it will not necessarily be students. In Nigeria, it's village wives going down and shutting down oil companies and things like that. But for this kind of society, it's going to have to start with students, but it can't stop there. I think this perhaps was one of the mistakes, and I hope you've read that article by Michael True carefully that's in our reader. One of the mistakes of the Tiananmen uprising was there wasn't enough of an outreach to other parts of the community. In fact, I was hoping against hope that those students would leave the square and go back to their campuses, factories, villages, and start building their democratic reforms. But in staying in the square, they made two mistakes. They failed to get out beyond their own circle, and the big mistake, the one that I'm constantly harping on, I hope you'll not get disgusted with this, that it was a symbol. The square was a symbol of the possession of China, and that was not exactly the right symbol. Not to mention the Goddess of Liberty statue, which looked like it was westernizing and so forth. Okay, Joanne, did you have your hand up? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, good point. In case you didn't hear it, they made a very interesting comment about leadership. There were people who had a leadership position, and especially if they were cute, they got to be on the camera all the time. But they said, did you remember what they said about leadership? Yeah, Matthias? Well, that's for sure. Yeah, they decentralized. They also used another phrase. Catherine? Okay. Yeah. Let me get back to that in a second. But they used the term layers of leadership. So they had. It's not like it wasn't structured, and it's not like it was not exactly like affinity groups. Well, wait a minute. I take that back. I've never been in an affinity group, so I possibly don't know what I'm talking about here. I think affinity groups have representatives that meet at a higher level, and so there is kind of a tree and there are kind of layers. But anyway, Kastner was facing the strategic value of not having a single identifiable leader. I'll tell you one kind of anguishing example of how damaging it can be to not have that precaution in El Salvador. Some people came into a village and said, we'd like you to elect leaders. We're going to have a new democracy here in this country, and we need democratic leaders. So the villagers very enthusiastically elected these leaders, and it turned out that those people were paramilitaries. They came back the next day and they killed everybody who'd been elected as leaders. So, strategically, stick your head off, it might get cut off. So there is that strategic reason. However, I also think that there's a deeper reason, and that is if you're doing principled nonviolence, you're really aiming at not reforming the system but replacing it. And you want to replace it with a system in which human beings and human will are paramount and they are not subject to manipulation. And for that, you do have to develop a different kind of community organizing. And so this layers of leadership might have been the germ of alternative institutions, which is the most important part of constructive program. Maybe it's the most important, but certainly an important part. Very good. So this is working very well. Sam, did you have? Okay. Yes, your name is? Christine. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah. 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 I also think that that's important, and I think that the role of humor throughout this whole thing was important, and that's why you actually have people today who there's a form of an organization called Clowns Without Borders, and they will actually do things like they'll go to checkpoints where you have these very grim-faced guards who are stopping people from getting through, and the people are very upset, and the guards are very upset, and then the clown will come along dressed in a clown costume, and you're like, hi, I'm Bobo the Clown, and just changes the whole thing. There are maybe some limits to how far you can go with this, but Matthias? That's where Patch Adams is involved, yeah. Yes, they do humanitarian work as well. Yeah, and humor is a therapeutic reality, there's no question about it, but we're talking about using it to break up the conflict dynamic and to keep, I guess we haven't really quite totally talked about this here, but in a conflict, the opponent is telling you you are subordinate, we are separate, and as long as you go along with that, either by saying I'm afraid of you or I'm angry at you, you're in his framework. But if you do something completely off the wall, completely unexpected, completely inappropriate, as it may seem, you're breaking up that mentality. And you're doing that by yourself. You can also have third parties do that. So the role of humor in keeping people from getting tense, thus keeping them from getting burned out. Most importantly, not going along with the threat power. Yeah, Matthias and then Amy. Yeah. 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 Right, so the coal miners went on strike. Last semester we discussed this critical moment in 1913 where Gandhi's movement up to that point had mostly involved free Indians, not laborers. And suddenly, due to an atrocity committed by the other side, suddenly women were involved. And then suddenly there was the women went to Newcastle to talk to the miners. The next thing you knew, you had 6,000 miners out on strike, so that brought labor into it. Remember when we read that introductory section to Pat Parkman's book on El Salvador and the other 3 uprisings in Central America, she tried to distinguish very carefully between a labor strike and a civic strike, which can include labor. So that's what this consisted of. It was a civic strike. It was a strike against the regime. It was insurrectionary, but it brought in labor, which is a powerful element, especially, where they say 2/3 of their electricity is coming out of that one mine. Incidentally, a very similar thing had happened a little bit before in Kosovo, where there was a mine up in the north and the miners went out on strike. Very similar reasons. Amy? Okay. I bet it does matter, actually. But okay, Risa? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And then? Yeah. But then, what about all that repression? Someone want to use a technical term here? Amuse and, yeah. Yes, when you use too much repression, you're going to get into the paradox of repression. So this is a very interesting 3-step dynamic. I don't think we ever quite put it together in this form. You have a dominating regime. As long as it's perceived as legitimate, it can get away with using a lot of repression. Though there is a point at which, if it uses too much repression, it will lose its legitimacy. But what you're saying here, Marisa, is that it lost its legitimacy first, and then it had to escalate the repression a lot in order to get back to the status quo, and it was impossible. Gotovye, he's finished. It's all over. Yeah. Now, if we have time and we actually do our who are the players with the situation and so forth,